Yo, what's going on, everyone? It's Brian and Chubbs here.
What? God damn it! I knew that was gonna come back! Motherfucker!
Woo! It's Brian and Jim, and we're here today checking out The Punisher on the NES.
Released in 1990, this is an NES exclusive. It was developed by Beam Software and published by LJN. It's one of the first Punisher games. It's one of the few rail shooters on the NES. Let's get into it. Let's see how good this thing is.
Graphically, this is one of the more unique games on the NES because it is a rail shooter. Let's get some of the negatives out of the way. The majority of these sprites look exactly the same. Now, in later stages, you might have more what I like to call the boss-style sprites, and then you have the actual boss fights themselves. And especially in this jigsaw fight, it almost switches to like a punch-out style. So there are plenty of details for all the sprites. We would have just liked to seen a little bit more variety. But other than that, looking at these stages, they kind of repeat the general pattern. You have streets, you have docks, you have jail cells, you have subways. There's maybe a few other handful of stages, but like, look at this dock here. There's a lot going on all over the screen. You have some foreground objects. You have the cityscape in the background with the horizon. It looks actually pretty decent. Now, because it is a Punisher game, most things are dark, and you wouldn't expect any less. The last thing we'll really say is that the destruction, although it's not uber impressive, they did put a lot of detail into how many things really do get destroyed in these levels, so we had to give it credit there. All in all, we think it's above average, so we both gave it a 6. And our favorite things are probably the cutscenes at the beginning and in between each stage, so they put a lot of detail there. And as far as beer, I'm just going to add 2, because I would have really liked to seen a little bit more detail on the sprites. And since it's a Punisher game, I mean, I would have liked to seen a little bit of blood. Come on, NES pussies.
Alright, the sound. Let's go first with the music, because there is not a lot of it. You get some in the intro screen, and you get some on Game Over. And really, that's about it. The levels are completely silent except for the gunfire, which is so just weird.
Jim!
What?
You forgot the jazz man. He has soul!
I was getting to that. Yes, there will be a random guy with a saxophone, and that will be the only little tune you hear during the levels. Besides that, it's just nothing but gunfire and all the attacks and explosions and shit like that. Honestly, it's a really weak package sound-wise, and we couldn't give it any more than 3s. When it comes to beer, I'll give it 3 beers. 1 for the lack of music during the game, 2 for the obscenely loud music when you get a game over, and 3 for that soulful jazz man.
The control is the area where Jim and I differ the most when we scored this game, and to be honest and upfront, the control is doable. You can get used to it fairly fast, and for a rail shooter, if any of you have ever played a rail shooter before, it actually isn't the worst kind out there. But for me personally, playing through this game in as many stages as I did, I hated the fact that, 1, you have to hold down fire in order to move your cursor, and just instinctually, you're going to tend to shift your whole body over to the right when holding down that D-pad, and you almost always get lit up with bullets because that's just the style of this game. The control style is fairly simplistic, so you use your D-pad to move the Punisher left and right, as I mentioned, and then when you hold down shoot, you can move your cursor. Then you have a shoot button and your grenade/special weapon button. It's very simplistic, but once again, this is just not a style that I enjoy, and from a control standpoint, I just find a little bit of fatigue just shifting back and forth and getting shot because I can't move the cursor in time. It's nothing that really hinders the gameplay experience if you really don't mind this style, but for me, it was a little bit of an issue. So, I gave it a 4, Jim gave it a 6. As far as beer, I'm just going to add 1, and it's for me just for dealing with that annoying cursor movement.
So the gameplay, it's a rail shooter. You constantly move around the screen shooting all the bad guys before they shoot you. Unlike some, there's no people to save, and the only person you shouldn't shoot is the jazz guy. The environments are really destructible, which is cool, so basically shoot the shit out of everything because there's always a ton of items, different weapons, just a lot of helpful shit behind there. And honestly, you're not going to make it through the later levels unless you find all the items you need. There's these newspaper clippings that give you hints, but they pop up for, I don't know, about a split second, and in a rail shooter, you're not really taking your eyes off the action to read that shit, so kind of a useless mechanic they threw in there. Every level has a boss fight, and to the game's credit, the boss fights can be different from level to level, which is cool. And sometimes, like Bryce said, they'll throw in a different gameplay mechanic, like Punch-Out, or I'd even say the old Shinobi on the Master System, where you gotta kill a bunch of ninjas as a boss fight. Shit like that. Besides that, that's really it. It's about as average a rail shooter as it gets. Doesn't make it bad, and while we found it weirdly fun, it also gets boring pretty fast. So it's got that weird dichotomy there. Certainly nothing wrong with it, but nothing astounding either, so we gave it 5s. And as far as beer goes, I'll just give it 1 beer for saving the life of that sweet, smooth jazz man. I got a thing for the jazz.
Ow! We know you do, Chubbs. Damn it! When it comes to originality, you've heard us say it over and over, this is one of the few rail shooters on the NES, and it is the first Punisher video game. So we had to give it points there. The fact that they had the Punisher in an NES game is surprising in general, due to his violent nature like I mentioned earlier, but we had to give it kudos where we saw. Other than that, though, from a rail shooter perspective, it's everything you expect, and even the destructible backgrounds and items, you've seen that before, even if just in arcades. So, I gave it an 8, and Jim gave it a 7. We couldn't give it any less points, given the fact that it is the first Punisher game, but it still didn't wow us that much. And as far as beer, I'm not even going to add any, because it was a really noble first attempt at a Punisher game.
The replayability. Honestly, there's not a lot here. I mean, I guess you could go through and try and get a better high score at the end. I mean, long story short, it's not the hardest game in the world, but it's no cakewalk either, so it'll take you a couple playthroughs to beat the damn game, but outside of that, there's really not many reasons to go back, so we gave it 3s. And as far as beer goes, I'll give it 2 beers, for the lack of anything else to do, and for, once again, that sweet, sweet jazz, man. Play that jazz saxophone. Ow!
Keep your perversions to yourself!
I've seen so much. I need new things.
Shut up, cuck! Damn it! So overall, Jim and I kind of mentioned it a few times throughout this review.
The jazz guy?
No, not the goddamn... Ah! We mentioned a few times throughout this review. This game, you can find some enjoyment, but let's be honest, this is as average of a game as a... But let's be honest, other than the fact that this is an original idea, this is a really average game, and playing through it, I found myself getting bored, but not bored enough to turn it off, just kind of wanted to keep going to see the end. Some reviewers give this game more credit than it deserves, and I think it's more for the originality factor, and sure, if you were a kid in 1990, this was your best Punisher option, but there's better games out there now, and playing it today, it just doesn't hold up quite as well, so we both gave it a 5. Like I said, not terrible, but really not worth much money if you're a collector or a Punisher fan. When we combine all of our scores together, it rounds out to a 4.9, so it's just under the average standpoint. Like I said, not completely terrible, and if you're someone who grew up with this, the nostalgia might be really strong for you and you might enjoy this game a lot more. For Jim and I, it's take it or leave it. When it comes to beer pairing, I'm going to have to go with the Anderson Valley Summer Solstice. I like to choose cream ales for these rail-style shooters simply because it's a more unique beer, just like this genre itself. It has enough alcohol to keep you just a little tipsy and just enough flavor where you're not going to be pulling away all the time. Obviously, the only chances you're going to get to drink are in between levels, so enjoy your sips while you can. This is a good one. But remember to drink your beers and play your games responsibly. As always, guys, thanks for checking out this video, and if you enjoyed it, make sure you give us a thumbs up, leave some comments, or better yet, why not subscribe? Till next time, guys, cheers.